During the week, the government will be submitting to the Fair Work Commission on aged care workers' salaries. It is my understanding the government will not put a figure on how much their salaries should increase by, but believes that the workers are severely underpaid and perhaps in need of a pay rise in the double digits. Well, joining me now is the Minister for Aged Care and Sport, Anika Wells. Anika Wells, thank you so much for joining us. Let's start with this submission to the Fair Work Commission on what salary rise do you think aged care workers deserve?
I feel they need a significant one, and that's why I'm really pleased that we've managed to work as quickly and as hard as we have to be able to put our submission to Fair Work tomorrow supporting a pay rise for aged care workers.
So my understanding is there's not a specific figure you're nominating, so what sort of language can we expect to see?
Look, you'll be able to read it yourself. And sorry, morning everybody. It's a busy morning in Nundah here. You will be able to read the submission. You'll be able to see that we support significant, meaningful pay rise. That's me speaking as the Aged Care Minister mind. This is a work across several portfolios and several ministers have carriage over it. We haven't put a number to it because traditionally governments don't put numbers to it. That is for the Commissioner to decide exactly what percentage the work value case is worth. But we have agreed that we will fund it no matter what the decision.
My understanding is, though, you do want something well in excess of inflation, but perhaps not at the 25% that the unions desire.
You're not going to get a figure out of me, but I will say I believe aged care workers deserve a significant pay rise, a meaningful pay rise, because the complexity of their work has increased significantly, not just through COVID in the past 2 years particularly, but in the past decades. And the kind of work that we want them to do based on the Royal Commission recommendations for aged care and for a better standard and a better future in aged care, it is more complex work. So they should be recognised for that. And when the number one issue that everybody wants to talk to me about in aged care is workforce shortages, we need to do something to value aged care workers better, and that starts with a pay rise.
All right, well, let's get on to that. People have been critical of your promise to have a registered nurse in every aged care home 24/7 by next July, saying the workforce issues, because of the workforce issues, it is impossible to achieve. Do you still believe that target's achievable?
Yeah, and I would say not people so much as the opposition have been critical, which I think is bald-faced galling based on the fact that they've had these workforce shortages exacerbate across 9 years. They themselves exacerbated them by cutting the workforce compact. One of the first actions they did in December 2013 as a new government was to cut a pay rise for aged care workers. So yes, they have now questioned how we are going to do it, which I think is just drastically galling for them to question a problem that they themselves 9 weeks ago had no intention of doing anything about. But that aside, it is a complex problem. It needs a considered solution. We're going to have to pull every lever. Number one is a pay rise so that people want to work in the sector. People feel that their work in the sector is valued. We also know from data provided by people like the Nurses Union that people have left the sector and want to come back. So we need to give them a reason to come back. And finally, we also know that people, nurses in particular, there's a huge percentage of them, almost 80% out there, that would take more hours if they could. So all of these reforms together will give those the money for those hours to hopefully bring these people back.
In the first week, I think you were asked in the Parliament how many extra nurses are required for this, and you said around 850. I forget the exact figure, but it was around that. Where did that figure come?
Yeah.
869, okay. Where did you get that figure from, and how come some in the industry have talked about thousands being required?
Yeah, so that figure is the modelling of the Department of Health and Aged Care. It's also modelling that the opposition had access to when they were the Aged Care Minister, when all this came up in estimates back in April. Everyone will have different modelling. The unions have different modelling, the peak body has different modelling. It's modelling, it's not tuck shop prices, it's modelling. It will have happened at different times, it will have different expectations baked into it. The point is, everybody, bar arguably the opposition, agrees that we have to do something about workforce shortages, and that's why we're acting so quickly to get the ball rolling, because unfortunately, as much as I would like it to be, it isn't a solution we are delivering this winter. It is a long-term systemic reform that we have to put in place because it's been neglected for so long.
Will any of this workforce come from offshore?
I think migration is part of the solution, but I've always said it isn't a silver bullet. I think people are looking for a silver bullet, and you would hope that if there was a silver bullet for workforce and aged care, someone would have pulled the trigger by now. I think that working with Andrew Giles, our new Minister for Immigration, we're looking at, like I said, every lever we can pull, but there isn't one particular lever that's going to solve this problem.
All right, so you got that first legislation for the government through this week. Through the Parliament, introduced a new aged care funding model, provided an extra $500 million for the sector, a code of conduct and star ratings. What material improvements will we see in aged care because of this legislation?
Firstly, like you say, it's a 10% uplift in funding, a 10% uplift for each resident in aged care at the moment. It's also more nuanced and sophisticated funding because basically it recognises that the cost of your care looks different depending on whether you are a homeless person who lives in Rockhampton or if you are a person who has dementia and needs to live in a memory support unit in suburban Brisbane, here where I am. The cost of that care looks different, and this is an updated funding model that recognises that. Also, like you said, the star rating system, I think people are going to really appreciate that. We're trying to get it in as soon as possible. I'm hoping to get it in by the end of this year. It will mean that you can look up the residential facility that your mum's in or your dad's in or that you're considering putting your parents in and see how they rate at different things compared to other comparable facilities. More transparency, more accountability into the system for taxpayer dollars.
What are some of the stories out of the Royal Commission and reports around it that have shocked you most around the treatment of people in aged care?
Well, I don't think reading the report specifically awoke me to the issue because it would probably be one of the top 3 issues that people come to electorate offices across the country about, my aged care. And we've all seen the stories that happened on Four Corners, people being left for hours, in soiled nappies, people being unable to get a shower, the state of malnutrition that people are in aged care. But I think what shocked me most in the report, the final report of the Royal Commission, was the view of the commissioners that government has had a detached approach to this. And they said specifically that it looked like the Morrison government really at all times looked to do the absolute minimum required. So like you would have seen in the Parliament, I've made a big effort compared to just the 9 recommendations that the Morrison government delivered of the report in their 17 months with it. We've now delivered 17 recommendations in just our first 100 days, getting the passage of these bills through the Parliament. I want people to understand we are moving as quickly as we can where it is possible to do so, but we are also going to look at these big systemic reforms and try to do them once, do them well, because these reforms have to last for decades.
And how does the delineation work between Mark Butler, Minister for Health and Aged Care, and Anika Wells, Minister for Aged Care?
Well, I look after the aged care patch with the guidance of my senior minister, who has been really helpful to me, particularly because he did this job in the Rudd-Gillard years. He was the aged care minister to the senior minister at the time, Nicola Roxon. So our carve-out seems pretty clear. If it's in aged care, I look after it, and I look to Mark for guidance or advice when I need it, and he's always available.
How has COVID changed the situation in aged care in Australia? I guess we're seeing earlier deaths are more common.
It's hugely exacerbated the existing neglect, and I would say through the system into crisis. We shouldn't shy away from the fact that this is a system in crisis. There were workforce shortages. COVID then took out huge amounts of the workforce. Everybody recognises that the state of workforce in aged care is in crisis. I do mobile offices here in my electorate of Lily. I've done 6 since becoming the aged care minister. Everybody turns up to talk to me about what's not working for them in aged care. I had a carer come to me. I think we were talking about lunchtime. She was due to start work at 2 p.m. and she said she already knew 16 people had called in sick to her facility that day. So COVID has made a very real problem very much worse, and we are now in our third winter, our third COVID winter in aged care. I've tried to be more proactive. I've introduced our winter plan to try and make sure that we are more ready this time, but I really hope that we're doing enough so that come next winter we won't have these same kind of horrific statistics before us.
Can your government solve this crisis, or is it one of those issues that is perpetually a problem for governments? You can just improve matters, but there will always be problems.
I think I see my job as two particular things at the moment. One, get us through this winter wave because everyone is so horrified by the deaths that we've seen in aged care because of COVID the past two previous winters. And secondly, put in place the reforms that will improve the sector in decades to come. And I say this to everybody that I meet. It's a huge amount of stakeholders in the aged care industry. Like, these reforms have to outlast us all. And I know that I won't be able to leave my office at whatever moment in time that is, knowing that I have fixed aged care for once and for all, because it's huge. It's tens of billions of dollars of the budget. It's every older Australian, you, I, Andrew, everyone we know ultimately will need the support of the aged care system. So we have to improve the standard of care, but we have to do it in a sustainable way. I know you were speaking about Jim's big test coming up for the budget. We have to look at reform that will make this change not only meaningful, but sustainable.
Minister, just a couple of quick questions on other issues. How concerned is the government by these actions by the Chinese government at the moment?
We feel that the response by the Chinese government was disproportionate and destabilising, and that now remains a watching brief for Minister Wong, obviously, to make sure that we're doing everything we can to stabilise security in the region.
And in terms of the permanent visas given to the Biloela family, what's your view on that? I guess critics of that, the opposition in particular, have said that will lead to more people seeking to come by boat. What do you say to that?
Well, I mean, the opposition might make that argument. They made that argument for years and years when they could have put this family at ease with the stroke of a pen. Minister Giles demonstrated yesterday that it really was that simple. I go based on what my constituents tell me, and what my constituents have told me is that they are relieved that we have shown a bit of compassion. This can be done in a measured way, and I'm sure that Minister Giles, alongside the Prime Minister, weighed all of that up before making this decision. I would say that ultimately it demonstrates that we really are trying our best to keep our promises that we made to the Australian people in May.
And just finally, on a lighter note, it does appear as if you tagged Anthony Albanese before he got over the try line in this State of Origin touch game during the week. Can you confirm that for us?
Firstly, Andrew, do we know if where the Prime Minister is currently on leave has television reception? Do we know?
I don't, I must admit.
This is going to be themed.
Here's the bunker. We're showing the bunker at the moment so he can watch it himself.
Andrew,
yes?
We are still waiting for the NRL bunker decision formally. I did, as you would have seen, call for the NRL Commission to take this as a top priority earlier in the week. Andrew Abdo is in the shot. You can see if you're replaying the footage now.
We are.
But let me take this moment to thank you, Andrew, for your support and the support of the Sky bunker and your demonstration of some very clear evidence as to what actually went down.
Well, Kieran and I just like to see fair play. That's all I'd like to say. Anika Wells, thanks so much for your time this Sunday morning.
It's been a pleasure.